SBC Media.
Brazil, a global economic powerhouse, deeply passionate about sports, and now home to one of the hottest markets in gaming. And we're giving it the full SBC treatment. Join industry leaders, market experts, and all the major players in the country for 3 days of content, exhibition, and epic networking at the first ever SBC Summit Rio.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
Hello and welcome to another episode of iGaming Daily, sponsored by SB Summit Rio. I'm your host for today, Conor Porter, senior journalist for CasinoBeats. And, well, we still do have the, well, I have to say old CasinoBeats team now because one of us has departed. Well, I suppose it could be age, it could be...
That's rude.
Could be
if only I could still sack you.
Could be, you never know how it might have been referenced to it. But anyway, yeah, joined by Craig and Danny. Craig, of course, going over now to media team, senior media manager now, SBC. And Danny, of course, resident SlotBeats expert, and I suppose you do a little bit of a here now on CasinoBeats too. And today we are having our conversations about branding once more. If you've been listening over the past few weeks, we would have caught our conversations about live casino and slots. Today we're going to be exploring online casinos and their lobbies and how branding plays a role in those aspects. And Craig, you recently spoke to Alison Brinkat, Senior Operations Officer of the newly launched online casino Davies, who spoke a lot about branding in that feature there. Tell us a bit more about that, particularly on the branding front for Davies.
So the thing from a BetPiece perspective is, like any new online casino, when players are kind of blessed with as many choices as they have these days, it's all about standing out. I mean, the first point is she spoke a lot about customer service. That's got to all be on point, which is standard for anyone. I suppose the key thing, it is all about that standing out, which we are going to get into a lot, so I'm going to be a little bit wishy-washy right at the top here. If you're one of the kind of juggernauts, I suppose you could say, you don't really have to do anything. Everyone knows you. You've done that work already. If you're one of these, especially like say BetBeast as a new operator trying to make its mark, you've got to stand out. There's loads of different nuances you can take to this. I would presume. I feel like I have to have a bit of context and a bit of a disclaimer into this. As someone who doesn't gamble, the amount of lobbies I have frequented in my time is quite limited. But it is all about standing out. You've got to appeal to players. And as like BetBeast, who has entered kind of a smattering of countries and has bigger ambitions going into next year, it's, do you proceed as kind of that one brand? Do you tailor that brand? Do you have kind of spin-off brands appealing to different countries? How do you kind of go about it? You've got to stand out, especially if you're going to try and, like I say, compete with these juggernauts. Otherwise, you're just going to get swallowed.
Exactly that. It's a way, in essence, to describe how we're currently seeing the current landscape when it comes to online casino lobbies. There's so many factors that come into play, whether you mentioned about the market that they're launching into or potentially what they can do for the customer themselves when it comes to the layout or the offerings that they have, whether it be slots or bingo or live casino,
and also what can switch a player off.
Exactly.
I mean, and that comes to the nuances of a market. If you was a player of an online casino this week and you'd seen everywhere safer gambling week plastered, and you logged into your online on any lobby, it could be any lobby, we're talking online casino. If you logged in and that homepage comes up and safer gambling week is in front and center, you're probably going to ask a few questions.
Certainly. Danny, how would you describe the current landscape of online casino lobbies and branding, particularly from a slots perspective, as you would have seen potentially dozens, if not more than that over a week of different slots. How does that play into online casino lobbies with their positioning on those lobbies and things like that? How would you describe it in total then over a current landscape of online casino lobbies?
It's certainly important. I agree with Craig a lot in that it's maybe less important if you're more of like I would say a household name sort of operator, like one that doesn't have to worry about that as much because they've got decades of experience in the business and they're just known already. But when it comes to your sort of smaller scale operators, it can be quite a lot more important due to the fact you are trying to create a brand, you are trying to acquire players and then retain them as well, and branding can be a big factor in that. You want these players are more likely to stay on your site if they enjoy looking at it, if they enjoy the sort of setup that you've got within the online casino lobby itself. But I'd say with these smaller operators and maybe newer brands, you can maybe focus on it too much. Like if you come across an operator that's maybe looks perfect and you really like how it looks, if it doesn't have the content, if it doesn't have slots there that you're maybe fond of or know about, or from developers that you're fond of and know about, then you're not likely to sort of stay with that operator just because it looks nice or because the branding appeals to you specifically.
Yeah, you mentioned there about slots. It can be so important for these online casinos lobbies with their branding to make sure that they have the slots that are popular with the players themselves in order to, it all plays into a role of being recognizable and also retaining those players as well for coming back and playing slots again in the future. And Craig, you mentioned about that aspect being particularly important in different regions and different markets. How big of a role does player-centric branding then play when it comes to online casino lobbies in comparison to, say, what Danny mentioned, like say if it was a new operator launching in the market, how big does player-centric branding play against, say, an operator's own branding and branding style?
I think before we jump into that, one thing just to kind of progress the conversation from what we just spoke about, kind of hinted at that's one broad rule worldwide there. I mean, it's absolutely not. We all know how much of a role M&A plays in the industry, and we see these huge operator organizations kind of swallowing up so many operators worldwide, and we've done a lot on Brazil in particular recently. I think everybody has spoken, done a lot on Brazil. We're fresh off our event in Miami, the SB Summit Latin America, and there's a lot of talk about it over there. And one of the key things that a lot of people spoke to me about was perhaps the difficulty of, we speak about these, Danny said household names, I've said the juggernauts, the more European-centric these companies, and it's going to be a lot harder for them to enter a country like that. And you see a lot of it in the Balkans. Entain have made moves. They've made a specific vehicle to try and target the Balkans now. The role M&A plays, it's not, like I say, it's not one rule for every country where an Entain could take one of their brands. A Bet365 can just be like, well, we're Bet365 and try and flex and just make a big impact in a country, in certain parts of the world, that kind of strategic M&A. And it's not just, you're acquiring a brand, and you can be acquiring a brand that players are familiar with, and it sounds a bit harsh to call it an easy win because they'll probably be spending a lot of money to try and make these moves, but kind of along those lines, rather than to try and compete. It's not just acquiring that, it's the expertise you get with it. It's the local knowledge. You've got people working there who have probably specialised in that country for a number of years. And that's where all, like you've spoken about, your branding and appealing to the personal preferences. Someone sat in Stoke working for Bet365 probably is going to have less of an idea what someone in Sao Paulo wants. But if you can acquire that local expertise, that's massive.
Do you have anything to add on that, Danny, in particular, with that local expertise in order to get that player-centric branding in place? Especially, I suppose it kind of works in different ways in the slot sphere from what you've seen over your time covering on SlotBeats?
Yeah, it's definitely a fair point. Obviously, we're quite European-centric with the sort of use of household names like that. And sort of the big operators we have around here, you are right, they don't have that same presence in the majority of countries. And it actually makes me think of other companies. Obviously, we're UK-based, so when other companies come to the UK and you look at how they sort of brand themselves here, like BetMGM have done recently, launching their UK operations, and you sort of wonder how different they are to how they advertise themselves in America.
The use of brand ambassadors with BetMGM as well, that's another key thing.
And even on that point, they used, of course, Leo Vegas when it comes to here in the UK too, to get a better feel of the market, which plays into your point about acquisitions and mergers in a sense. But, continue, Danny.
Yeah, so I just think, obviously, there is a variety of different players in all of these regions, never mind just a variety of regions that have to try and enter and advertise to. So from a slots perspective and an online casino lobby, I think a lot of it probably comes down to player preference. And so if you're trying to advertise to players in different continents, then I'm sure there's lots of people in research and development that are looking at statistics, looking at what performs better, what needs to be at the front of your online casino lobby, which slots maybe you would prefer to get from one specific provider. And because that provider has, a bigger impact in said regions. So I think it's very research-based, and if you don't quite have that down to a T, then that's probably why some of these smaller operators maybe struggle with their branding and then sort of cementing their position as a brand across multiple continents, rather than just these sort of brands which you see maybe just focus on one market because they've got like a bit of a stronghold there, so to speak.
One thing we've spoken about a lot on the slot side, we've spoken about this a lot between ourselves, and we've probably spoken about it a lot on past podcasts. We've spoken about slot studios and from the innovation perspective, and what's the motivation? Do these companies want to really kind of cement a legacy and do something different, or do they want to make enough noise and get bought? That same rule can kind of be applied to the operator side of things as well. What does an operator want? Does it want this true success across either a selection of targeted markets, a true global scale, or does it want to just get to a certain point and then have that M&A vehicle come and get it?
Would you say then that there needs to be some sort of like refresh when it comes to online casino lobbies, particularly when it comes to that aspect of it? Or do you think maybe it's...
I'm not sure I'd say a refresh. I mean, speaking from my perspective, like I've said, don't gamble. For context here, we did a lot of work on multiplayer slots recently. There's podcasts on this previously. There's a lot of content on CasinoBeats. So doing work on multiplayer slots, you had to play Slot Masters, right? And at the time, Hungry Bear had just done a deal with one operator. So I thought, right, I'll log in and I'll get an account at its operator. I knew it's free to play because I knew there was no RMG aspect of it yet. So I went in and did that. And the thing that's kind of kept me going back there is, sounds incredibly cheap for me here, but the amount of free stuff they have going on. They have a load of free games. And within these free games are leaderboards and rewards. And that's kind of what hooks players. You'll get it from a video game perspective. It's all competition. Players love that competition. Players are desperate to win. When you just kind of spin in a slot. And, I mean, there's a lot of skepticism amongst players with that anyway. That's a whole nother debate. But I think that aspect... A lot has been said. I mean, I've been in this industry over 6 years, and I feel like this has been a common theme throughout the entire time. But to me, personally, if I was looking at it from that player perspective, that's what I'd say. More kind of leaderboards, more competitive aspects, more tiered reward systems, all kind of that kind of aspect.
Or more social aspects.
I think so. I mean, I know it's easier said than done. They can't just flick a switch, but that's kind of what I'd say. I don't know if Danny would agree.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think promotions are quite a bigger aspect, well, becoming a bigger aspect of these like branding within operators. So I think that specific deal you're talking about is quite a good way for a brand to almost make someone else's product that is like got a player base behind it already. It's got interest behind it already because it is multiplayer. It's like a new genre that's sort of still being figured out in the industry.
And every player's not going to be like me. Every player's not going to log in and see loads of free stuff and just stick to that.
Exactly. There's an abundance of players that will just look at these deals, look at these promotions. I mean, there's people who will hunt out for these promotions and maybe only sign up and try these different deals, but the like welcome offers and deposit offers and stuff like that. So that's another important bit of branding I don't think we've mentioned is having sort of something you present into players to draw them in initially, in terms of, are you going to give them like a match bonus? Are you going to give them a number of free spins? These are all things that draw people in that perhaps do play a part in their branding that maybe go a bit overlooked by some operators that are sort of more focused on the content itself and other aspects of the brand.
One aspect we've not mentioned amongst all this branding is there's a very global theme around safety at the minute, as there should be. I'm not talking that down at all. That's huge for players these days as well. Players want to feel like they're protected by an operator, and to put it incredibly bluntly, no one wants to feel like the operator's just money grabbing. Players need to feel like they're protected, and like if anything is even remotely going awry, that the operator's going to step in and just be like, right, hold on a minute, be sure. That's a huge part of branding these days. Players need to know that they feel protected.
Yeah, and they can tie it into like gamification tools, can't they? In terms of like education of the player, in terms of like, oh, this is how you play a slot, you know, this is how you play an online casino game, and promote responsible play that kind of way. I
mean, like I say, even in my own experience, I've just that one account, and I just go in, every day, and I'll do a few of the free games. But even then, the messaging comes through to you, whether it's a message to your account, whether it's an email. You still get all the messages about it, which is how it should be.
Yeah, and that's such an important aspect that any online casino needs to have, is to emphasize that responsible play straight away from the beginning, to make sure that players are, not playing beyond their means and are playing responsibly. In terms of looking at the future for like online casino lobbies, particularly what we may have seen during the time covering the industry, Craig, is like rebranding of lobbies themselves, when it comes to whether it be how a lobby is structured or an operator itself giving itself a rebranding, a new name or a new image when it comes to online casino. Like, how much of an influence can that play on future success?
I mean, if you look at future success, I think I've nearly went through an entire podcast about buzzwording, I think, but I'm about to. Personalization, there you go, there's your buzzword. That's the thing that players want. I mean, the whole Netflix thing is kind of grating on my nerves a little now, because I've heard it so much. But that's huge. I mean, and you can tie that into things like we spoke about: gamifications, tournaments, competitive aspects, social aspects, the personalized aspects for players. If you're gonna rebrand and it's just gonna be somewhat a little bit generic, shall we say, again, there's arguably no point. You've got to embed that within everything and tie it into everything else we've spoke about, in my opinion.
That's a good point, Danny. And anything to add on, particularly rebranding? I suppose it kind of plays into the aspect of slots when they do like reskins of a slot that's happened in the past. What influence do you think rebranding can have on online casino lobbies when it comes to rebranding?
Yeah, I think it obviously depends on the operator. I mean, if you're one of these sort of big fishes of an operator, then there's no real need to do anything like that, to do these rebrands. You've got your position, you've got that recognizability, and you've sort of already figured out through experience.
And the financial muscle to just buy a successful operator in a country you're targeting.
Yeah, there you go. But if you're maybe not an operator like that and you've got to put a bit more work in, then it can be quite important. And I suppose it depends on what part of your journey you're on as well. Say if an operator starts out as a sportsbook only operator and they start to delve into the world of online casino a bit more, they start to garner quite a lot of content. Eventually, if they can rebrand themselves into more of a split platform, you look at, for example, I know William Hill offer slots and stuff on the sportsbook platform, but they've also now got William Hill Vegas, which is specifically for online casino players. So I think things like that would obviously come a bit further down the line from when you're starting out just as an operator in your first few months or years.
Anything else to add, Craig, particularly on a final point on online casino lobbies and their branding?
We've just spoke about looking ahead to the future. I think it's just going to get harder and harder for new entities to come in and make a mark. Like we've said throughout, you've got these established, real big companies that can have multiple arms across multiple countries. There's a handful of examples we could reel off right now, but I'm sure we don't need to because everyone will know who we're talking about. My last point is, like I say, just going to be on what to potentially expect in the future. And in my opinion, that is these kind of big, I've said juggernauts a few times, if a new country's opening up or wherever it may be, they've got the expertise anyway. They just require a bit of that local nous. And they've got, like me and Danny have just said there, they've got the financial muscles to flex. So those are the ones that are gonna come in and acquire these successful brands and just kind of put their own little tint.
Yeah, it's looking like a very difficult field to navigate, but there's definitely potential avenues which online casino lobbies can take in terms of their branding to have success within the actual space. So we'll leave it there. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Danny, for joining us on iGaming Daily today, and tune in tomorrow for more from iGaming Daily.
SBC Media.